back to Smart Bharat. Today, we are going to learn about something that lets us make decisions when we write code. Whenever we're in the kitchen, we have to make many decisions. For example, if we're making curry and it's too bland, we decide to add spices and salt to it. If we are making kheer and it's not sweet enough, we decide to add more sugar to the kheer. Even in our daily lives, whenever something happens, we often react to it by doing something else. If you receive a phone call from your friend, then you pick it up. If someone invites you for dinner, you will go to their house to eat. Similarly, we make multiple decisions when writing code in Python. Often, we will only do certain things if and only if something else is true. Let's think of an example. Say that we are making tea and we only want to add sugar if and only if there is already no sugar in the tea. We can start by making a variable to store either true or false if the tea already has sugar or if the tea does not have sugar. Let's see how we can do this. So I'll create a variable called has sugar and I will store true inside of this variable. So for now, let's say that this tea already has sugar. So that's why we stored true inside the variable has sugar. Okay, so this variable just tells us if the tea has sugar or not. Now we can check in Python to see if the tea has sugar or does not have sugar. Let's see. So if has sugar, then we print that the tea already has sugar. So what we're doing here is first we write the word if. Then we write something called a condition. If our condition is true, only then the code that comes after the condition will work. Otherwise, it will not work. So after we write this condition, we create a colon and we press enter. To create this colon, you have to press the shift key and the colon key at the same time on your keyboard. After this colon, we press enter and we write whatever code we want to work if this condition of ours is true. But it will only work if the condition is true. So let's see what we're doing in this case. We're first checking to see if the has sugar variable is true. If it is true, then we anyways don't want to add any sugar. So we just print that the tea already has sugar on the terminal. And this will only get printed because our condition over here is true. So let's run this and see what happens. As you can see, it says that the tea already has sugar. So first we're checking, just to reiterate, first we're checking if the variable has sugar is true. And if and only if this variable is true, then we run the code that is underneath our condition, which is why we saw something on the terminal. But what will happen if our condition is not true? What happens, in other words, if it becomes false? Let's take a look. So instead of setting our has sugar variable to true, I will now store false inside of it. So this tells us this variable is saying that our tea does not have sugar. Now let's see what will happen if I run the code. Well, nothing. We see nothing on the terminal. Why is this? It's because our condition is not true anymore. And because it is not true, the code that we have written below the condition will not work. Let's now answer a small question. In this code, the variable milk is set to true. What will the code print on the terminal? The correct answer is option A. We will see that milk is available on the terminal. Our milk variable stores true. Because of this, the condition in the if statement is also true. So, the code underneath the if statement works too. Now, let me trick you just a little bit. We already have all of this code. Now, what if I create another statement to print hello after all of this? What do you think this program will now print? Let's run the code and see what happens. Wait, we see hello this time. But why does this happen? Earlier, I had said that any code after our condition will only work if the condition is true, right? Well, here's a catch. This second print statement that we have is not actually inside the if statement. It is outside of our if statement. And since it is outside of our if statement, it will always run no matter what. So then, how do we know if something is inside or outside of our if statement? We can understand this through something that's called indentation. Indentation is a very important concept. It lets us help create if conditions and many other things in Python. Whenever you want to put code inside an if statement, you need to press the tab key on your keyboard. When you press the tab, you are doing indentation. And this helps Python understand what code is outside your if condition and what code is inside it. Now, some good news is that as soon as you press enter after writing your if condition, the code editor will automatically indent for you. This means it will basically just press the tab key for you automatically. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So here we are writing if, and then we're writing our condition, and then we finally create our colon. And now when I press enter, you can see that the tab is already created for us by the program, by the computer. So indentation is automatically done as soon as you write your if statement and press enter. Now what happens if you want to write some code outside of this if condition? So let's just go back to what we had before. So yeah, let's say we want to write some code outside of our if condition. How do we do it? Well, for this, you have to press the backspace button on your keyboard, and this will remove the indentation. Let's try our example once again. So first we will check if we have sugar. So let me just clear that. So yeah, our first statement checks if we have sugar, and this is our condition. Then we press enter, and as you can see, the code editor automatically creates a tab on this line number 4. It automatically does indentation. Now we can print that the tea already has sugar. Now we want to write something outside of our if condition, outside of our if statement. So how do we do this? Well, like I said, we have to remove the indentation. So all we have to do is press backspace, and this removes the indentation. We are not anymore inside of our if statement. We are outside. So whatever code we write now will always run. Let's again just print hello on the terminal. And let's run this. As you can see, we see hello on the terminal, because even though our hash sugar variable stored false, which means our if condition was false, all of this code did not run. But this code was not inside of our if condition. So this ran. Now what will happen if I change the hash sugar variable to store true? Let's see what runs. We first see that the tea already has sugar, and then after that we see hello on the terminal. Why is this? Well, let me walk you through it. First, we set our hash sugar variable equal to true. This means that our tea already has sugar. Then we check to see if we have sugar, and only if we have sugar, only if this condition is true, then the code inside of our if statement works. So this code will work. And on line number 4, we will print that the tea already has sugar. And again, this will only work because we already have sugar. And after that, the code outside of the if condition, outside of the if statement works, irrespective of this variable and this condition. So no matter what, this code will always run. So that is why we first see that the tea already has sugar, which comes from line number 4. And then after that, we see hello on the terminal, which comes from line number 6. Now it's time for a quick question. Imagine you have a variable called milk and it stores false. What will the following code print? The correct answer is option B. You will see hello on the terminal. The print statement inside of the if block will not work because the condition milk is false. However, the statement to print hello is outside the if block and will always work. Now let's move on to the next part. We also have something called an else statement in Python. This is very useful when we want to do something if our if condition is false. So let's use our tea example again. Currently, we first check if the tea already has sugar, like I said. And if it does have sugar, then we simply print that the tea has sugar. But what happens if it doesn't have sugar yet? Well, for that, we can write an else statement. So I'm just going to remove this line that I've written on line number 6. And now let's create an else statement. So we only want to add sugar to the tea if the tea doesn't already have sugar, right? Well, we can use the else statement to do this. So let's see how we can do this. We first press enter and we go to the next line. Then we must remove the indentation. So we press backspace. Now we write the English word else and we just write a colon. After this, we print enter. Again, our code editor will automatically add indentation for us. Now, let's print that we will add sugar to the tea. Okay, so here what is happening is if this has sugar variable, if that is true, meaning that the condition for our if statement is true, then the code inside of our if statement will run. So that is this code. But if this condition is false, then the code inside of our else statement will automatically run, which is this code. So let's now set has sugar to false and see what happens. Let's run this code. As you can see, it prints adding sugar to the tea. This is because our if condition was false. So the else condition or the else statement ran. Let's try one more question now. If the variable milk is true, what will the following code print? The correct answer is option A. On the terminal, you will see milk is available. Since milk is true, the code inside the if statement will work. The code for the else statement will not work. But if we change the variable milk to store false, the if statement will not work this time. Instead, the else statement would work and we would see no milk on the terminal. Now let's use the same example, except instead of just printing things, we will create a variable to store the amount of sugar in our tea. So first let's create a variable called sugar and we can set it equal to 0. So let me clear what we have already and let's create a new variable called sugar and we make it equal to 0. So this sugar variable stores the number 0 inside of it. And so by writing this, let's assume that we are making tea and it has 0 spoons of sugar right now. Okay, now we can write an if condition to check if there is sugar in the tea already. So let's first write the word if, then we can write if sugar is more than 0 and then we write our colon. Then when we print enter, the indentation automatically happens. The code editor automatically creates that tab for us. And then we just print that the tea already has sugar. Now our first condition here checks to see if the number that we store inside sugar is greater than 0. If that number is more than 0. This is basically the same as checking if the tea has sugar at all. If this condition is true, the terminal will show us that the tea already has sugar. But what happens if this condition is not true? Well, like we saw earlier, we can write an else statement. So first over here we check if the sugar is more than 0. If it is, then we print that the tea has sugar. But what if it isn't? Well, we need to write an else statement like I said. So let's first print enter. And at this point we are still inside our if statement. So we need to get out of the if statement. So we have to press backspace and this gets rid of the indentation. Now we have to write the word else and then we put a colon and then we print enter. The indentation now automatically happens. Here what we can now do is first print that we are adding sugar to the tea. That is the first thing that will happen if sugar is If this condition is not true, then it goes to the else condition. It goes to the else statement and the code inside the else statement runs. In this code, we will first print that we are adding sugar, and then we will increase the value of sugar by 1. So we do sugar plus equal to 1. And then we print enter one last time. We write enter one last time. But this time we don't want to write code inside of our else statement. So we have to remove the indentation. So we press backspace, and now we will write print sugar. This will print the new value of sugar if there is any new value. So what we're doing here, just to recap, what we're doing here is we are first checking to see if the amount of sugar in the tea is more than 0. This is our condition. Now if this condition is true, which means that if the sugar in our tea is more than 0, then we simply print on the terminal that the tea already has sugar. But in any other situation, we will increase the amount of sugar instead. Let's try and run this code now. Okay, so on the terminal, we see that it added sugar, and we also see the new value of sugar. First, it was 0 spoons, correct? Now, it is 1 spoon. This is because Python first checked if the tea had any sugar already from here. But we initially set the sugar variable equal to 0. We stored the number 0 inside of our sugar variable. And this means that our tea had no sugar. So the code inside the if condition, the code inside the if statement did not work. This did not work. Instead, the code inside the else statement worked. The code inside the else statement worked, which is this code. If we change the value of sugar to 1, 2, 3, or even 100, the code inside the else condition won't work anymore. This is because these values are all larger than 0. Instead, the code inside the if condition will work. We can test this too. So let's change our code a bit so that we are not writing the value of sugar directly. Instead, we can take it in as input. So instead of writing sugar is equal to 0, I will create an input statement this time. And inside this input statement, I will ask the user how much sugar does the tea have. Okay, so I have this sugar variable and I am setting it equal to an input statement. This input statement asks for some information to the user, and this time it is asking the user how much sugar does our tea have. Whatever the user types, it will store inside this sugar variable. And then if the sugar is more than 0, then we will just print that the tea already has sugar. Otherwise, we will print that we are adding sugar, and then we will increase sugar by 1. However, before we run this code, there is something that is wrong with it. Can you try and guess what is wrong with this code? Okay, let me tell you. Whenever we store some input inside a variable, Python will always think that it is a string. And we had discussed this in the previous video too. Now, if you look at some of our later code, you will see that we are doing operations that can only be done with numbers. For example, we are checking if sugar is more than 0, or we are adding 1 to the value of the sugar variable. All of these things are fine to do with numbers, except the sugar variable is not a number. Imagine trying to add a number to some text, or trying to check if some text is bigger than a number. It is not mathematically possible, right? So, if you remember, all we have to do here is wrap our input statement inside the int statement. So let's see how we can do this. So here I will write int, and then I will create an opening parentheses, and then at the end of this line I will create a closing parentheses. Now everything will work perfectly. Let's try and run the code. So this time it is asking us as users how much sugar does the tea have. So this time we can enter our own values for sugar. So first let's try this with 0. And I write in 0 and I press enter. So this says that we are adding sugar, and then after that it will print the new value of sugar, that is the number 1. So now we have 1 spoon of sugar after we add the sugar. Now let's try running this code again, but this time instead of writing 0, we will try it with the number, let's say 1. So it asks us how much sugar does the tea have. We type the number 1 and we press enter. This says that the tea has sugar, and finally it prints the value of sugar, which is 1. Why is this? Well, it's because the sugar variable stores the number 1. That's what we gave it as input. What we're doing here is first asking the user how much sugar our tea has, and then we get that value in our code and we convert that value into a number, because initially it was a string, but then we put the int statement around this input statement, so that makes the string a number. So now it is properly the number 1, and that number 1 gets stored in the sugar variable. Then we check to see if the number inside the sugar variable is bigger than 0, and if it is, the code inside of our if statement works. If it's not, then the code inside of our else statement works. And at the end, we finally just print what is stored inside sugar. So because we wrote the number 1 over here, this means that we had 1 spoon of sugar. And when we checked to see if the number of spoons of sugar was greater than 0, it was true, because 1 is a bigger number than 0. So the code inside of our if statement works. And that is why we see that the tea already has sugar. Let's try running this with another number. Let's say maybe 100. So let's say our tea has 100 spoons of sugar, and that is a very sweet tea, but let's just assume that. So let's press enter, and now it says that the tea has sugar because the number 100 is bigger than the number 0. And then finally we print the value that is stored inside the sugar variable, the number that is stored inside the sugar variable on line 9, which is why you see the number 100 on the terminal. Okay, awesome. Now it's time for another question, and this time let's do a simple one. Here is some code that has a small mistake. Find the mistake first and then correct the code. In this code we have a variable called milk. We check to see if milk is equal to 1. If it is equal to 1, we print that there is enough milk. Otherwise we print that we need more milk. The correct answer is option A. A single equal sign is used only to change the value of a variable or create a new one. But when we compare values, we need to use two equal signs. This is why. Finally, one last question for today. In this code, we first take input for the value of the milk variable. If the input for the milk variable is the number 3, what will the code print on the terminal? The correct answer is option A. On the terminal, the code will print that there is enough milk. We input the value of milk as the number 3. Later, when we check if the milk is more than the number 2, it will be true. So, the code for the if statement will run. The code inside the else statement will not work. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching.